Raise the flag.
Light the cauldron. We declare the Games Odyssey open.
Welcome to the Games Odyssey Podcast, your home for stories of glory from Olympia to now. I'm Jonathan Jordan.
And I'm Sarah Patton.
And today we're officially launching the podcast by, well, talking about the podcast. Is that okay? Or is that kind of like a rock band wearing their own merch when they're on stage? What do you think?
I think it's okay. Hopefully anyone who's listening to this episode will think it's okay, but I always like to know what I'm getting myself into when I pick up a book, when I go to a concert. I'm the geek that looks up a set list before I go to a concert, no matter who it is, because I want to be able to sing along. So hopefully talking about the podcast will prepare our audience for what they can expect.
Yeah, I mean, if nothing else, you can kind of look at this like an extended trailer to see what exactly you are getting yourself into, because I feel exactly the same way. There may be some of you out there who all you need to know is Olympics and Paralympics, and you just skip right past this and go on to the next episode. And maybe that's all you need. But if you want to know exactly what we're going to be talking about, the format of the show, who we are as hosts, and why exactly we're doing this, then this episode is for you, whether you are tuning in as soon as we launch it, or whether you're listening to this 3,000 years in the future. In the spirit of Simon Sinek, we're going to talk about the why of the Games Odyssey. That is why we love the Olympic and Paralympic Games so much, why we wanted to start up this podcast, all of that fun, wonderful stuff.
Next, we'll talk about who we are, just in case you care about that. And then after that, we'll talk about what you can expect out of the podcast, the format, what topics we'll cover, all that good stuff.
Yeah, and then we'll talk about when you can expect the content to be released and how you can be a part of the story. I mean, Odyssey. They're the same thing. But we're going to take a quick little break, and then when we come back, we're going to talk exactly about why we love the game so much. So we'll see you in just a minute. All right, so here's the thing. I have been a games addict pretty much as long as I can remember. Growing up in our house, it was always about watching the Olympics every other year, watching every possible minute of the broadcast, especially after NBC got the rights, even to the point of recording it. If you remember having to do that on a VCR, we would record it anytime we were going to be out of the house during the broadcast so that we could catch up on it later on. Fast forward through the commercials and watch all of the events, watch all of the athlete profiles. It was just really a part of our life, right? Sarah, how about you?
Yeah, I grew up the daughter of a pastor, but before he was a pastor, he was a sports writer. So sports have always been kind of a big deal in our home. And naturally, the Olympics and Paralympics would fall into that. I think my earliest memories probably were from 1992. I vaguely remember that. And maybe that is just from replays, but I feel like I vaguely remember my family sitting around watching sports. I don't have a ton of memories. And then 1996, I was 7 years old, and that was the big one. And especially being in the United States, the games being in Atlanta, I remember watching Bob Costas at night doing the broadcast. And of course, as a little girl in the United States, the Magnificent Seven, when they won gold in gymnastics, there was that moment that was very pivotal, I think, for my generation, as well as the 1996 gold medal women's softball team, where I just knew I was going to be a softball player. I remember a lot of those things. I remember Michael Johnson, but I'd say overall, my oldest memories that are very clear are around the 1996 games.
Yeah, I would say my memories also go back to the 92 games, at least vaguely. Now, in 92, that's when I was 7 years old. So I do remember a little bit about the Barcelona games. Part of that may be, as you were just saying, replays, watching that cauldron lighting over and over again because it was so cool with shooting the arrow up to the cauldron. But also because I had an older brother who was a big basketball fan. And of course, that was the 92 Dream Team. So I think that was really fixed in my memory of just watching that group of incredible talent on the court in 92. So those are the big memories I have of 92. But I think the clearest memories I have going far back, like yourself, were those 96 games in Atlanta because it was such a huge deal. It was here in the US, and I was old enough at that point to really understand what the Olympics were and looking at the history of them. And that's really, I think, part of what got me into history to begin with, was just the background of where the games came from originally. Now, the Paralympics have been painfully underrepresented, and that's a topic that will come up more often as we go through the history. So I'm curious, what's your first memory of knowing about the Paralympics and seeing that play out?
Yeah, so I remember vaguely seeing footage of, wheelchair racing and things like that, but not really understanding what the Paralympic Games were. However, I had the privilege of growing up with a Paralympic athlete. And, I'm sure Taylor will come up a few times since we both know him, but he was a sled hockey player. He represented the United States 3 times. And the first time that he went was in 2006, and he had competed internationally before competing at the Paralympic Games. So we already knew that he was on the national team. And so I feel like having that unique experience, I learned pretty early on as a teenager what the Paralympics were, that they followed the Olympic Games, that they got the same type of medals as the Olympic Games, and that it was still something huge and something to be celebrated. So I have friends who are still just now becoming familiar with the Paralympic movement. So I'm really grateful that I got kind of a front row seat to how significant the Paralympics were.
Yeah, absolutely. I think similar to you, the first mention I ever heard of it was the 96 games, but it was just clips. It was barely a highlight on a newsreel, essentially. You didn't have it broadcast on television. It wasn't something that was widely promoted. But I do remember seeing some clips of track and field and being impressed by it and thinking to myself, how come there's not more of this for us to be able to watch? And then I remember being reminded of it during the 98 Nagano games, because I remember seeing some clips, again, not the whole event, but just clips of alpine skiers, Paralympians, and being really impressed with that too. So I'm glad the movement has come a long way. And again, as we start going through the history of the Olympics and Paralympics, we'll talk more about how that happened. But I felt like it was necessary for us to at least spend a moment thinking about when we first got exposed to it. But let's go ahead and shift gears a little bit and talk about the why of the podcast, why we are talking about this. After all, there are other podcasts about the Olympics and Paralympics out there. And why would we start one up? So for me, it really comes down to the fact that I love the stories behind the games. I am a storyteller. I'm fascinated with storytelling, especially true stories. And so the stories behind the games, the athletes, what the games represent, that's something that has just always really captivated me. How about you?
Yeah, so similar to you, I've always loved the stories. I'm the girl that, when they do the human interest stories, I'm the one that gets really sucked in. And whenever they, like in Tokyo, if they show things about the culture, or in Tokyo, it's just recent on my mind, but anywhere that they've gone, that NBC has teams and they're doing research on stories about the location, and then of course the athletes, their families, what they've gone through. I love it. Growing up, I love sports, love the competition, but there's just something so special about getting to watch people's dreams come true. And a lot of the Olympic and Paralympic sports that we see, these are not sports like American football, where they have a huge drawing every year. It is so cool to get to watch these athletes who deserve so much respect and admiration, that they get the screen time that they deserve. And sometimes they deserve a lot more screen time than they get. But
Sure.
and that, again, that could be a soapbox about the Paralympics, but but it's so cool to see that front and center. And so, yeah, I'm excited to get to share some of these stories, to get to be a part of this. I was so excited when you asked me to be a part of it, because I could talk about the Olympics and Paralympics all day. And I think there's so many stories to tell. And if we get to do a part of that, get to tell some of those stories and inform people of something that maybe they didn't know before, then that's just a great privilege.
Yeah, you were a pretty easy person to convince to be a part of this, because you do love the Olympics so much. I thought I loved the Olympics, and then I met you, and then realized I paled in comparison. But I really had to spend more time convincing myself, because I love listening to other podcasts, and I didn't really ever see myself starting up something like that. But what I've found over the past couple of years in particular, as I've been dreaming this up, was I was already spending a lot of time reading about the history of the games and the athletes. I'm already a storyteller. Sarah, you know this about me. Other people don't, but I've written screenplays about Olympic and Paralympic athletes. And there's just so many stories that I want to tell, but I can't turn all of those into books or screenplays. So I really started thinking about the podcast as an outlet to talk about those stories and to get them out of my system, and hopefully really inspire some other people to come along for the ride more than anything else. But for me, that was the hardest hurdle to get over, was convincing myself that I could do this and that I could be that storyteller.
So tell me, why the Games Odyssey, and where did the name come from?
There's a couple of things. First, as we discussed early on, I wanted a name that was inclusive of both the Olympics and the Paralympics, because, as we've already mentioned, they do not get as much visibility, even though, as the name suggests, they're supposed to run parallel and be equals. And so Games really captures that, because we often refer to them as, you already did it here, the Tokyo Games or the Atlanta Games. It's this all-encompassing idea where you're covering both the Olympics and the Paralympics in that single word. Second, Odyssey, that word just pays so much homage to the Greek roots of the games, referring to the story, the Odyssey, by the way, blind Greek poet Homer. And in that story, he does mention athletic competitions. It's one of the great classics in literature, of course. And the word, so much so that the word Odyssey itself has become synonymous with storytelling. And that's really at the heart of this podcast. One thing I didn't mention a second ago is, even though there are other Olympic podcasts out there that I love and that I listen to on a regular basis, most of them are interview-based, which is great because we're not going to be doing that. There's not as many devoted to just pure storytelling. So I really felt like that was a gap that we could fill in, and putting those two words together, Games and Odyssey, just really kind of fulfilled for me as a sports nerd and as a history nerd. It just really drew me into that idea. And once I thought of it, I don't know, it just felt like it fit.
Yeah, I think it's great. Full disclosure is that I would sit down and spend time trying to think through a name. And once I heard it, the Games Odyssey, I couldn't think of anything that was better than that. So I'm really happy with the choice. But yeah, something to kind of piggyback on is, you talked about being a history nerd, and that is also something about me, is I'm a history nerd. Yeah. I cannot just travel somewhere. I have to find all the historical sites. I cannot watch anything without digging down the history of the location or whatever the topic is. Like if you watch a show like Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, I'm not just watching that and laughing. I've got to go research the 1950s comedy bars in New York City and find out who these real people were.
Oh, yeah.
And apparently that's not everyone does that.
I'm in the same boat as you are. My wife regularly teases me for when we're watching something or listening to something, and I'll say, hey, fun fact, did you know? And at the end of the day, she really doesn't care that much. She is not nearly into history the way that I am, and so she gives me a hard time about it. So this is a good, safe space for that, and she's relieved about that too. I can get it out of my system this way. But just in case people care, I think we need to talk just a tiny little bit about who we are as people and kind of connect that to why we are telling these stories. So, Sarah, let's start with you. Tell everyone just a little bit about your background and kind of briefly what got you here.
All right. So my name is Sarah Patton and live in North Texas. I have a husband who is wonderful because he lets me throw big Olympic parties. And he just encourages me to do all the fun things. He calls them my shenanigans. We have a 2-year-old son who is already really into the Olympics, and people don't believe me when I say it's not my fault, but the kid is obsessed with American flags and reenacting medal ceremonies. And I mean, this might be what an Olympic fan would hope for their child, but I promise I did not force this. It's
okay if you did.
Yeah. I mean, when we are recording it, it is a few days after Christmas, and he got the Fisher-Price little people that are the Olympians. And he was beyond excited. It was his favorite gift. And that in and of itself is a gift to me. But as far as kind of how I got here, a really crazy thing happened a few years ago where Team USA, they did a contest to find who their number one fan was. This was in 2017. Actually, backtrack a little bit. In the summer of 2017, I went to New York, and I was one of the people that went to the plaza for the Today Show, and I held up a sign with a countdown to the Olympic Games for Pyeongchang 2018 Winter Games. And the producers of the Today Show thought that was just so funny that this girl has this random countdown. And of course, it's NBC that hosts the Today Show. So they gave me a TV spot. Someone from Team USA saw it, and I had said, yeah, my dream is just to be Team USA's number one fan. That's what I'm here for. And then a couple of months later, Team USA announces that they're on the hunt for Team USA's number one fan and that they were doing a contest. So I had to write an essay, do a video submission, and found out I was a finalist. And then they interviewed me, and I ended up winning the contest. Spoiler alert. So I got the title of Team USA's number one fan, which was my own personal dream come true, and got to go to New York for the 100-day countdown for the Winter Olympics and mingle with a bunch of athletes. And there were just some really cool opportunities that opened up out of that. Got to know some athletes that we still keep in touch with. It was just the experience of a lifetime. And some people would have that happen and just think like, well, that was really cool. I don't think Team USA understands that they're just like banning the flames of like, I've got to keep going. This is so cool. And so I feel like it is my responsibility to get people excited about the Olympics and Paralympics. There is something for everyone to be excited about, whether you like sports or not. Anyone can root for watching people's dreams come true. Anyone can get excited about so many people from around the world coming together in a peaceful way for sportsmanship. I mean, when can you have all those countries together? So that's a little bit to brag on myself of kind of something fun that happened to me. In my spare time, I hang out with my 2-year-old, and I also bake a lot of cookies, which was accidental. It was an accidental adventure that happened. And so I've had the privilege to bake cookies for some Olympians. My cookies went to the Olympics. I will never be in the Olympic Village as an athlete, but my cookies have been. So if you're an athlete out there that wants cookies to take to the Olympic Village, I got you. And then...
And what's the name of your cookie baking company?
Yeah, it's Wildwood Cookie Co.
Okay.
It's a lot of fun. And then last but not least, I need to talk about my dog. I have the greatest little black and white Shih Tzu on the planet. His name is Theodore. And fun fact about Theodore is that he has had the privilege to try on more Olympic medals than I have. And I'm not jealous whatsoever.
I know I already know this, but I'm curious for you to share with others a little bit about just your own sports history. What did you play growing up, if anything? And, how has that, I guess, also inspired your interest in the Olympic Games?
I grew up trying all the sports that I could. My brother and I, we did Little Dribblers basketball, Little League. I did t-ball, softball, soccer at a recreational level. I did gymnastics, which was a lot of fun. And then the sport that I ended up doing for the longest time was volleyball. Did that throughout high school. Loved it. And then, well, there's two things that I can share about this, but when I met my husband, we were totally in the friend zone. We just egged each other on for a year and a half. We're very competitive. And he one time said, I bet you can't run a mile. And I said, watch me. Next thing you know, we were running half marathons and marathons just to one up each other. And then one day we were like, maybe we like each other. And the rest is history. So I would say I really got into running. Still love to follow running. But yeah, growing up, volleyball was the biggest sport that I participated in.
Have you been to any Olympic sites throughout the world?
I've been to a few. So when I first met my husband, we were overseas and I was in charge of a team that we were on. And it was, the opportunity showed up that when we were in Amsterdam, we had several sites that we needed to go find as part of a scavenger hunt. And I was in charge. So of course we had to go to the 1928 Olympic Stadium. So there's a picture of us, very jet lagged in front of the stadium. In 2013, I had a brief layover in London. So I left the airport to go and see some Olympic sites, including where they did volleyball. When I was in Tokyo, I saw some Olympic sites from the 1964 games. Once again, kind of like how we talk about how we're history nerds. If I'm traveling somewhere, it doesn't matter. If I can find out that there is something Olympic related nearby, I'm going to find it.
Right.
When we went on a vacation when I was pregnant, for like a baby moon, we were in San Diego. Well, hello, Chula Vista, the Olympic Training Center is nearby. So we had to go do that. So yeah, wherever we go, I just always try to find any of the Olympic sites that I possibly can.
Yeah, I wish I was more intentional about that myself. Now I'll have to be, for no other reason than the podcast, I guess. But yeah, I love those stories and that you seek out those places very intentionally.
Well, one more thing about that is that I think for people like us that watch the games and that get excited, we also just kind of know what to look for, that maybe the normal people don't. And I say that because this, what should we call it? This thing that we have, I think it's contagious. So I say that because a few years ago, I was at Cadillac Ranch in Amarillo, and someone said, "Hey, I like your Team USA shirt you're wearing." And I looked at her and recognized her and said, "You are Sarah Robles." And if you don't know, Sarah Robles got the bronze medal in 2016 in Rio, and this was just a few months later. And she was like, "Whoa, you know who I am?" So pay attention to the Olympics, all the sports, whether it's weightlifting, archery, it doesn't matter. You never know who you'll run into. So always be ready. Also, Sarah got bronze in Tokyo. But then when I say that this is contagious, I have a friend who went to Hawaii over the summer for a week. And I knew that she was going to the same city that the United States swimming team was training at. And so I told her, I said, you better be on the lookout. And sure enough, she was at a pizza place and ran into Michael Andrew, who was on the 2020 swimming team. So you just, if you know what to look for, you just stumble into it.
So back in 2016, I was having to travel quite a bit for the job I was in at the time. So, you know, I was in the airport a couple of times a month, and this was right in between the Olympics and Paralympics for Rio. And so I'm trying to remember where I was exactly, if I was in Minnesota or Dallas. I think I was in DFW airport. And I'm going along, I'm pretty sure I had just landed, and I see this guy in a wheelchair, and he's got some bags like hanging off the back, and they say Team USA on them. And so I kind of awkwardly run up to him, and just with the very little bit of shame that I have, I just approached him and I said, "Hey, are you headed to Rio for the Paralympics?" And he like stopped and just kind of stared at me, and he was like, "Yeah, I am actually." And so, you know, I quickly introduced myself. I asked him for his name. It was Josh Wheeler, who was on the wheelchair rugby team, both in 2016 and in 2020. And so I asked him, you know, what he played. He was like, "Oh, I do wheelchair rugby." I was like, "Oh my gosh, I love wheelchair rugby." And so, you know, just kind of quickly encouraged him, because he was on his way to kind of their last training camp that they would do right before flying to Rio. So he was telling me about that, and, you know, took a quick little selfie with him, and then we parted ways. So you're right. You just kind of have to be on the lookout for those moments, because there are Team USA athletes all over the place, and Olympians and Paralympians all over the place. So definitely encourage listeners to always have their eyes open. But kind of using that to jump into who I am a little bit. So I've already talked about being a storyteller, being a writer. That's something I've always been really passionate about. Like you, Sarah, I have a family. I've got a wife and a son. And when the Olympics and Paralympics are on, we cheer for two teams, because we adopted our son from Japan. So this year was really, really fun for us watching the 2020 Tokyo Games, because he doesn't really remember watching the 2016 or the 2018 games. This was really the first games he really got into, and he got to stay up late and watch it. He was really sad when the Paralympics were over. There was one day he got home from gym practice and he was turning on the TV. I was like, "What are you doing? You're not allowed to watch TV this late night." He was like, "I'm turning on the Paralympics." I was like, "Buddy, they're over." And he was like, "Oh man." And I said, "It's okay. Because of the pandemic, we're going to have them back here in like 6 or 7 months. So we can watch the Winter Games together. You just got to wait a minute." So we're definitely into the Olympics and continuing that tradition that started in my family when I was a kid. My wife is not a huge sports fan, but she does get into the Olympics and the Paralympics, and supporting, as, people who live in the U.S., supporting Team USA. And as I've already alluded to, sometimes she gets a little burned out with me talking about the Olympic Games, so she's excited about this outlet for me as well. But I've always been really invested in that human side of the games, not just the glittery part of people getting their their rewards at the end, but even celebrating the athletes who don't end up on the podium, but have sacrificed so much just to represent their country and just to make it to the games and the accomplishment that is. So I know that's something that has always inspired me, because I'm never going to the Olympics for anything. Like you, Sarah, I did a lot of the Little League stuff growing up, did a little bit of baseball, which I was terrible at, did a little bit of soccer, which I wasn't great at either, maybe a little bit better than baseball. Really, the sport I did the most was running. And even with that, I had numerous occasions where I fell down, because I'm just not the most coordinated person in the world. And in high school, really, I discovered that I was better at long distance. So I did cross country, kind of like you. That really got me into long distance running in general. So I have done half marathons and marathons. I'm not in marathon shape currently, but
Same.
Definitely a goal for
Happens
me to
to
get
all
back
of
into.
us.
Yeah. I'm not going to be running alongside Kipchoge anytime soon unless he's just really sympathetic and just goes really slowly next to me, which I'm down for that. If he ever wants to meet up and run together, I'll do it. But that's just kind of a little bit about my background with sports and what's really kind of led me to starting up the podcast. So that being said, let's talk a little bit about the show format. We are going to be focused on storytelling and the history of the games, and not so much on interviews like a lot of other Olympics podcasts are. We encourage you to go listen to those. We do it ourselves. They're great. Just not what we're going to be doing here. So if you're really interested in interviews, this might not be the podcast for you. There's really 3 main types of episodes that you can expect out of the Games Odyssey. First, the main thing we're going to be doing is talking about the games in chronological order, literally starting with the ancient games in Olympia, Greece, and going all the way up to the present. So it's gonna take us a little while to get through all of that, but that's part of the fun of it. Because this is a history podcast, we're going to stick to that history and not current events. So we're not going to be doing news reports on things that are currently happening. We're really just going to try to stick to the facts. That way we can approach it with a little bit more objectivity, because I think we've all had instances where 10 years later we look back and say, I look at this situation completely different now. So if you want breaking news about the games, there are those other podcasts out there. There's other websites that are already doing a fantastic job of that, and we encourage you to check them out. We will probably feature some current news in our weekly newsletter that will be starting up. So we'll do a little bit of that. But again, we'll be mostly pushing you to those other people rather than taking full ownership of that. Generally speaking, we're going to cover one Olympiad or Paralympiad per episode when we are talking about the games. And then we'll cover, as we'll talk about in a second, we'll talk about an athlete's story in an episode, usually after we discuss the games that they were featured in. Every now and then we'll have a games that we probably will need to split into 2 episodes, because there are a few of them where, to do them justice and to get enough of the stories in, we're going to have to do that. But for the most part, we're going to be talking about 1 games per episode. Talking about the second type of episode we're going to have, we will highlight stories of individual athletes, and not just ones from the US. After all, the games are at their heart a global celebration. We want to be a part of that. We want to celebrate people from around the world. So if you're here and you're not from the US, awesome. We love having you here. We want you to engage with us online. We look forward to highlighting your country and your athletes at some point or other. So this is not just a Team USA thing at all.
Yes.
We will be talking about people from all over.
Yes. If you are listening and you're from the other side of the world, please, please, please tell us, because I know for both of us, we really enjoy hearing stories from people from other cultures. And in recent Olympics, both 2018 and 2020, well, 2021 technically, but I remember watching Olympic games really, really late at night and getting to connect with people online. And so it's just really, really cool. So I just want to reiterate also for me, like, please let us know that you are here. And that we might be in Texas. We might love Texas athletes and be biased, but we do in fact cheer for the stories of athletes from all around the world.
Yeah, I mean, I always get excited when they give those stats during the games that this is the first gold for this country ever, or this is the first time they've medaled in this event. ever. I get excited for countries when I hear that because it is such a big deal. And as I've already mentioned, our family cheers for 2 different countries when the Olympics and Paralympics are on. So we already kind of have that global mindset going into it. Sarah, you mentioned going to Tokyo. The first time I ever went to Tokyo was about 1 week after they were awarded the games. So it was fun being in Tokyo, and they already had the logo up and were celebrating the fact that they had gotten the games awarded to them. So yes, we definitely want this to be a global audience, hopefully. And then that kind of leads into the next little point I want to mention, which is that we want to be as inclusive as possible with what we cover in our episodes. So recognizing that it's going to be a while before we get to the Paralympics, we're going to be looking for opportunities when we can highlight and discuss athletes with disabilities whenever we can. We may even do an entire bonus episode at some point where we just discuss athletes who have competed in both the Olympics and Paralympics, because there have been a few really fascinating cases of people who've been able to do that. Okay, so to recap quickly, we will have episodes about the games themselves and the history behind the games. We will have episodes highlighting athlete stories. And then, Sarah, what's the third type of episode that our listeners can expect from us?
The third type of episode that listeners can expect will be wildcard episodes. So wildcard episodes are going to be things like top 10 lists we come up with, or special episodes that just don't really fit into the other categories. We'll also be creating some exclusive content for the show for sponsors. So extra athlete profiles, or maybe even some profiles on different countries and the history of their involvement in the games. So all in all, a wildcard episode is exactly what it sounds like. A wildcard.
Yeah, it'll be just kind of those fun things we throw in of topics that we want to cover. So again, eventually we will be creating some sort of sponsorship for the show, and we'll get you information on that when we have it available. But it's one of those things that we want to be able to offer some extra content where we do something like highlight a country and their history of their involvement in the games, or if there are certain topics that we're hearing from people that they would like us to cover. As long as it fits into the theme of the show, we're always going to be happy to consider that. Which kind of leads us into one of the, things that's really important, I think, to discuss real quick, which is what we want the tone to be of the show. Overall, we want this to be a positive space. The world has enough negativity and division, and the modern Olympic movement was partially created as an effort to encourage peace and unity through sports. So that being said, we're going to work really hard to make this a neutral space and to be positive, to be inclusive, to as much as we humanly possibly can. We're not perfect human beings. We'll make mistakes, but we want to be really cautious about not interjecting our own personal feelings or opinions too much. That's part of why we're making this a history podcast, so we can stick to those facts. So we also want to remind people along those same lines that it's going to be impossible for us to cover every detail and every athlete's story in an episode. You could pick any Olympiad and you could make 1,000 stories out of it. And we just don't have that kind of time. We're doing this for fun. We've got families. We've got errands to run. I've got snacks to eat on occasion. So it's one of those things where we may not talk about an athlete that you really love. We may not talk about a specific fact from a games that is really fascinating to you. That's okay. We're open to feedback. We want you to give us feedback and suggestions on if there's anything we've missed. We'll gladly consider that. Maybe we can turn that into a blog. Maybe we can cover that in a bonus episode. But all I would say for now is rule number 1, if you're giving us feedback, be kind and constructive with your criticism, because we are open to it and we want to hear it and we want to make the show engaging and interesting to people. And rule number 2, ultimately, it's our show to cover what we want. So it's one of those things where just kind of meet us in the middle and understand that we're not trying to exclude anyone or anything. We just have a limited amount of time of what we can cover. So anything you want to add to that?
Nope. Just, I promise you that we're doing our best, and assume that we have the best intentions. But yeah, please be kind. Otherwise I'm going to need my dog to, cuddle me or something. So my poor dog, every time I get upset, I'm like, come here.
I did not really fully prepare you for this, Sarah, but to help people get to know us a little bit better before we close out this episode, I've got some surprise questions for you, and you may not like me very much after asking some of these questions, but there it is.
Oh boy, now I'm questioning the surprise questions I came with. Mine might be too nice.
If you could pick only one Summer Olympic sport to watch, what would it be?
I want to choose carefully.
It's a tough question.
It is. This is like having to choose a favorite child. Okay. I'm going to say something, and hopefully you let this be an answer.
Okay. Go for it.
Athletics.
Yeah, I am okay with the answer of just like a sport. Like you could have said swimming. Mm-hmm. And just covered like all the different events, right? So, okay.
Yeah,
so
I get to keep my shot put. I get to keep the marathon. I mean, there will still be a lot of grieving over the sports that had to go, but athletics.
Sure.
What about you?
For me, if I had to only pick one thing, it would have to be gymnastics, because we are a gymnastics family with my son. And the gymnastics portion of the Olympics does take up a lot of time because they have so many events and there's so many things they have to do, from qualifying to the team event to the all-around to the individual apparatuses. So yeah, if I had to pick something, that would be it. And it pains me a little bit to say that because, like you, I love track and field so much and I could watch it all day long, but that would be my pick. And so you can maybe predict where I'm headed with my next question for you, but if you could only pick one winter Olympic sport to watch, what would it be?
This one's a little more difficult because I feel like I'm going to betray some people. My buddies, if you're listening, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to say skiing, because if I can keep skiing, does that mean I get to include biathlon?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that counts.
And then you get alpine skiing,
Absolutely.
You get freestyle skiing, you get cross country skiing with Here Comes Jessie Diggins. So I would say skiing, just in the similar vein of athletics, that I could keep more. But I'm very biased to curling. What's up, Schuster?
I'll say I'm really surprised you didn't say curling. For me, I would kind of cheat the way that you did, and I would say for the Winter Games, if I could only pick one event, anything where they slide would be my answer.
Oh, that's good.
So bobsledding, luge, skeleton, those are some of my favorites to watch, and if I had to pick, that's what I would go with. So if you had to pick one Paralympic summer event, what would it be?
I am very tempted to say athletics. The similar mentality of trying to be inclusive of lots of little sports within one.
Yeah.
Although I gotta say, I'm a sucker for para-triathlon.
Yes.
So I'm inclined to say that, but let's be real.
Yeah.
I'm glad that this is all hypothetical. I can't think about it too much, or else I'm going to change my answer.
Yes. Yeah, it's just for fun. But I'm the same as you. I would probably stick with athletics for the Summer Games, because there are so many events that I want to be able to watch under that one umbrella. And then Winter Paralympics.
Yeah, Winter Paralympics. Oh, I want to say skiing, but I think I have to say hockey.
You don't have to.
Well, but I've talked about this before, and I'll probably talk about it again, that I love watching sled hockey. I like watching sled hockey more than I like watching able-bodied hockey. I don't really know why that is, but I get so much more into it. I know I've got some biases there, but it's just so exciting, and I love the rivalry.
Well, I don't have biases there. I mean, yes, I know Taylor, but even before I met Taylor, that would still be my answer, because it is such an exciting sport.
It's so fun.
Thankfully, we don't have to pick in real life.
It's all for fun.
So
did you say sled hockey would be yours or something else?
Oh yeah, okay. For the Winter Paralympics, if I only had the option, like if something crazy happened with my schedule, and for whatever reason I could only pick one thing to watch, then it would have to be sled hockey.
Yeah.
So,
if you could compete in one sport, so I've got Olympic and Paralympics, and then also winter and summer. Yeah. So same thing, all the things, one for each. Yeah. What would you actually compete in?
Gosh. That's tough, because again, I love running so much, and it's the only sport I've ever had any type of talent for, that I feel like I have to say long distance. So 5,000 meter or even the marathon. I could never compete in real life with those people, but I think I would have to pick that. But there's a part of me that really wants to say archery, just because I think it looks so cool, and I don't know. I've always wanted to give it a try. So, for winter, that's really tough for me to answer, because I just can't even visualize myself doing any of those sports, because I've never done a winter sport. I enjoy going ice skating, but I only do it like once a year. So I don't have any real talent with it. It's just something that I do for fun. So if I had to pick something in the Winter Games to compete in, I think I'd have to go with speed skating. Just because I think it's the most realistic for me, since I at least have some experience with ice skating and with running, which, skating is very different than running. You use different muscles, but I think that's where I would see myself the most likely. That's my answer. Okay. So I would like to say I could do some of the other things, but that's the most realistic answer. Those are good ones.
Okay. Good answers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So, we're going to kind of start to wrap things up here a little bit, because we've been talking for a while, and hopefully by this point you kind of know what to expect out of the show. But we want to give you a couple more expectations in terms of how the show is going to come out, when it's going to come out, and ways that you can join in on the story yourself. So first thing, we plan to release the show in seasons. That way we can record ahead of time, because as I've mentioned, we do this for fun, and we do have lives outside of it. So you can probably expect around 20 episodes per season, and then we'll have a little break in between those seasons. That's not counting any bonus episodes that we'll come out with for sponsors. We do plan to also release the new episodes every week. There will be exceptions to that. For example, if you're listening to this when it first comes out, we will be taking a break after we release the first few episodes, because we're going to be releasing them in between the Olympics and the Paralympics in Beijing. So we're going to be spending our time watching the Paralympics, not recording during that time span. So there will be occasions like that where we're going to take a little mid-season break, but for the most part, our plan is to do a weekly release. Second, we do have this thing that's called a website, if you've ever heard of them before. So that website is gamesodyssey.com. That's the word games and then the word Odyssey, ODYSSEY.com. We'll have the episodes on there, obviously, on top of wherever you normally listen to podcasts, but we'll also have the transcripts, the show notes on there. So if you want to dig into a topic more, you can actually go click the link from the research that I've done and go do some more reading on things that we weren't able to cover in the episode. So that way we can save you a little bit of time on digging up that research, and you can just go to the website and check it out. We do also strongly encourage you to sign up for that weekly newsletter that I mentioned before, so that you can get some additional content, some blogs on things that we can't cover in the episode. Different games news of what's going on in the Olympics world, and maybe the occasional video that we find and like and want to share with everybody. Speaking of video, you'll also be able to find video versions of the podcast on the website and on YouTube. That way we can make it more inclusive. So if you know people who are hearing impaired and they want to be able to enjoy the podcast, the video versions will have captioning on them so that they can engage with the content that way. So by all means, if you have people like that in your life, tell them about the show and that we're trying to provide a way that they can enjoy it as well. Okay. Now, Sarah, since I personally am not a big fan of social media, where can people find us online besides the website?
All right, on Facebook, you can find us at the Games Odyssey Podcast page. And we may start a group later on. If that's something that you'd be interested in, let us know so that we know if we would actually have members. For Instagram, you can find us at Games Odyssey Pod. That's GamesOdysseyPod. And on Twitter, it's the same thing at Games Odyssey Pod. So follow us, interact with us. We want to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. So at the end of the day, we want you to join in. We want you to, be a part of that Olympic and Paralympic spirit, and really the spirit of storytelling that's behind this podcast. By the way, we are not experts by any means. Neither one of us has a degree in history. At least I don't think you do, Sarah.
Nope.
I know I don't.
Nope.
Not unless there's one hiding somewhere I didn't know about. So it's one of those things that, again, we may get something wrong occasionally. Every now and then, shocker, the internet is wrong about something. So if we leave something out or get something wrong, we do want to hear about it because we are not historians, okay? So give us that feedback, correct us, just do it nicely. And in the spirit of the games, we want this to be, as I've already mentioned, a place of peace and unity, common ground, positivity, and we want to invite you into that space and enjoy it with us.
Yeah, like Jonathan said, we want it to be positive. Not that we can always avoid the things going on in our world, because that's just impossible. But if this is a way that we can foster a space that allows you to just disengage from all the negative headlines that are going on around us, those headlines will still be there. The bad news will still be there. Just jump in, have some fun with us. We hope and desire that, this is a place with warm and fuzzy feels. That, I don't know, if I'm Team USA's #1 fan, I'm also just a huge fan of wanting people to have a happy experience. And I hope that we can provide just at least a small sliver of that.
Yeah, and on that note, because my notes here got a little bit messed up, and so I failed to mention this already, but it actually ties in perfectly with what you were just saying. Both of us are parents on here, and so we do want this to be a family-friendly show. Now, let me add a caveat to that there are going to be topics that come up that are not the most family friendly. Okay, that's just part of the history. Even though this is a positive space, we're not going to shy away from some of the more difficult things that have happened in the Olympic and Paralympic Games. So there are going to be occasions where you can listen to this show with your kids. There may be some episodes you want to skip over. There may be some specific moments you want to skip over. We're going to try to give you as much warning ahead of time as we possibly can with that. But just know that, we want this to be something that families can listen to together. but you need to be prepared for some of those difficult things that are going to come up, especially in regards to, there will be conversations about racism that come up. It's unavoidable when talking about the early days of the games, and we want to be honest about that and make sure that we're including that because it's important to talk about. So it's one of those things that you as a parent need to decide what you're okay with your kids hearing and having those conversations with them. And if you're not ready to do that, then maybe that's an episode you skip over. But I think we need to get that out there now before we have our first quote unquote real episode.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. Yeah. In the vein of wanting it to be warm and fuzzy feels, that's because it's exciting to talk about the history of the movement, the history of the games. But you're right. We've got to also acknowledge when big things have happened and things that have shaped the future of sport. And so, yeah, we'll give you a heads up when that's happening. What can listeners expect on the next episode? The first real episode.
Yeah, because this was not a real episode. So, as I promised earlier, we are going to be going in chronological order. So that means we're going to kick it old school, like really old school, and go back to the ancient games at Olympia and talk about that. So if you're listening to the show as it's coming out, we're releasing all the first 3 episodes at the same time, so you can just go ahead and jump into it if you want to. If you're listening to this, again, 3,000 years from now, then you've already discovered it's on there, so go take a listen. But it is about 1,200 to 1,500 years of history, so we are going to have to split it up into 2 parts. One focusing on an overview of the ancient Olympic Games, the backgrounds, the events that were included, and then the second part of it, the next episode after that, will focus more on some of the individual ancient Olympians and how the ancient games eventually came to an end. There's some pretty amazing and absolutely bonkers stories that I didn't even know until I was doing the research, so really excited to be sharing it with you. But that's where we are going to end.
And if you enjoyed this episode,
and we really hope you did,
then go ahead and check out the next 2 episodes on the ancient Olympic Games. We also strongly recommend you find us online at gamesodyssey.com and sign up for our weekly newsletter for more Games Odyssey content. To make your life a little bit easier, you can also find the link in the show notes just below the episode description.
And you can also help the show grow by sharing us with any of your friends, your family, your enemies, or any of your annoying acquaintances who also love the Olympics and Paralympics. We're excited to start this journey with all of you, but until next time, au revoir. The Games Odyssey Podcast is a production of Wardrobe Media, LLC. This episode was written, hosted, produced, and edited by Jonathan Jordan and co-hosted by Sarah Patton. Show notes, including research sources and transcripts, can be found on our website, gamesodyssey.com. Olympic is a trademark of the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, USOPC. Any use of Olympic in the Games Odyssey podcast is strictly for informational, commentary, and educational purposes. The Games Odyssey podcast is not an official podcast of the USOPC and is not sponsored, endorsed, or officially affiliated with the USOPC or the International Olympic Committee or International Paralympic Committee. The content of Games Odyssey podcast does not reflect the opinions, standards, views, or policies of the USOPC, and the USOPC in no way warrants that content featured in the Games Odyssey podcast is accurate.